I took in a lost virgin Apache girl, until night fell and we couldn't hold ourselves back. It was a bright morning when James decided to take his usual walk along the winding trails near the outskirts of his small town. The sun had just begun to climb over the hills, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. James liked walking alone. It gave him time to think, to feel connected with nature, and to forget the usual worries of life. But that morning, something unusual caught his attention. Among the tall grasses and the twisted branches of the forest edge, he saw a small figure moving slowly. At first he thought it was just a child playing, but as he got closer he realized it was a girl, no older than 16 or 17, clearly lost, frightened, and alone. Her clothes were simple and slightly worn, and her dark hair was tangled with leaves and twigs. Her eyes widened as she noticed him, a mixture of fear and hope flashing across her face. James stopped a few feet away, lowering his hands to show he meant no harm.
"Hey," he said softly. "Are you okay? Can I help you?" The girl didn't speak at first.
She shook her head, keeping her distance, her small frame trembling. James could see she hadn't eaten in a while. Her face was pale and she looked exhausted. He realized immediately that she needed someone to guide her, someone she could trust. He said again, this time with more warmth in his voice. You don't have to be scared. I can help you get somewhere safe.
It took several moments, but finally she nodded slightly.
She didn't speak, but there was a silent understanding between them. James reached into his backpack and pulled out a bottle of water and a small snack he always carried with him. Slowly, cautiously, she came closer and took them, her hands shaking slightly as she held the food. As they walked together, James tried to keep the conversation gentle. Do you know where your home is? He asked. The girl shook her head again. It's okay, James said. We'll figure it out. You're not alone anymore. The forest was dense, the paths winding and sometimes hard to see. James kept a careful eye on her, making sure she didn't fall or get hurt. The sun climbed higher, and the heat began to rise, but neither of them spoke much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was shared. A quiet companionship formed from necessity and trust. James thought about how strange life could be sometimes. One minute he was on his usual walk, enjoying the soft sound of leaves rustling in the wind, and the next he was responsible for someone's safety, someone who clearly needed him. Yet he didn't feel burdened. There was something in the way the girl looked at him, her eyes filled with a cautious trust, that made him determined to help her, no matter what. After walking for a while, they reached a small clearing where a stream trickled over smooth stones. The girl stopped and knelt by the water, drinking quickly. James sat nearby, careful not to crowd her, watching her quietly. It struck him how resilient she seemed despite her small size and the fear in her eyes. She had survived alone in the forest, and that was no small feat. James decided it was time to find a safe place where she could rest. He thought of the small cabin he sometimes used when he went on longer hikes. It wasn't far from where they were, and it had basic supplies, a bed, some blankets, and food that could help until they figured out the next steps. Can you walk a little further? James asked gently. She nodded, her face serious but determined. Together they continued along the trail, stepping carefully over roots and stones. Every now and then she looked at him, her expression curious but wary, as if she wanted to ask questions but didn't know how. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the forest floor. James opened the door and let her inside first. She paused at the threshold, unsure, but then stepped in, her eyes taking in the small space. James set down his backpack and offered her a seat on the edge of the bed. You can rest here for a while, he said. I'll make some tea. You must be tired and hungry. She nodded, and for the first time she spoke a few words. Thank you, she said softly. Her voice was quiet, but filled with genuine relief. James smiled. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show that she trusted him. While he prepared the tea and some simple bread, he thought about what had happened. How had she ended up alone in the forest? Where were her parents or guardians? He didn't want to press her too hard. She needed to feel safe first. Sometimes the best way to help someone was to let them regain their strength and confidence before asking questions. After a few minutes, he handed her a cup of warm tea and a piece of bread. She accepted them carefully, her fingers brushing his briefly. James felt a small warmth in his chest, an unspoken connection that went beyond words. He watched her eat, slowly savoring each bite, and realized how important this simple act of kindness was. For her, it wasn't just food. It was reassurance that someone cared. As the evening wore on, the sky outside turned a deep shade of blue, and the first stars began to appear. James suggested they light a small fire in the fireplace to keep warm. She helped him gather wood, moving quietly but efficiently. It was comforting to see her begin to relax, to see her slowly letting go of some of the tension she had carried since being lost. Sitting by the fire, James asked gently, "Do you want to tell me your name?" She hesitated, then said, "Ayanna." The name was soft and musical, and James liked it immediately. "Nice to meet you, Ayanna," he said warmly. "We'll figure everything out, I promise." Ayanna smiled faintly, a rare gesture that made James feel hopeful. They talked quietly by the fire, sharing small stories about their lives. James about the town, the forest, and his love for walking, and Ayanna about the small things she remembered from home. She didn't reveal much, but that was okay. Trust would take time. Night fell and the forest outside grew quiet, the sounds of birds and animals giving way to the stillness of darkness. James made a simple bed for Ayanna with blankets and pillows. She climbed in, still looking uncertain but calmer than before. "Sleep well," James said softly. "You're safe now." She nodded, her eyes heavy with fatigue. As he watched her drift off, James thought about how life could change in a single day. One moment he was alone on a morning walk, and the next he was responsible for a stranger who needed his help. Yet instead of feeling burdened, he felt a deep sense of purpose. That night the fire crackled softly in the cabin, and outside the forest rested under a blanket of stars. Inside, two people who had been strangers just hours before began to form a quiet bond, built on trust, care, and the simple human need for connection. It was the beginning of a journey neither of them could have anticipated, a journey that would test their resilience, challenge their fears, and teach them about courage, friendship, and the quiet power of kindness. As James sat in the soft glow of the firelight, he knew one thing for certain. He would not leave Ayanna alone again. No matter what came next, he would stay by her side, helping her find her way. And for the first time that day, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, everything would turn out all right. Morning arrived slowly at the little cabin. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting soft lines across the wooden floor. James was awake early as usual. He quietly made a pot of tea and prepared a small breakfast while Ayanna still slept. Watching her sleep, he felt a strange mixture of relief and concern. She had made it through the night, but he knew there were still many questions. Questions about where she had come from, why she had been alone, and how he could help her find safety and comfort. After breakfast, Ayanna woke up. Her eyes were slightly puffy from sleep, but she seemed calmer than the day before. She stretched and looked around the cabin, her gaze lingering on the little details, the wooden shelves, the small stack of books, and the cozy fireplace. It was a small space, but for her it felt like a sanctuary after being lost and alone.
"Good morning," James said softly, smiling.
"Did you sleep well?" She nodded. "Yes, thank you," she said. Her voice was quiet, but there was a sense of gratitude behind it. James offered her a cup of tea, and they sat together at the small wooden table. They didn't speak much at first, but the silence was comfortable, filled with the gentle sounds of the forest outside and the soft clinking of cups. Once she had eaten a little, James suggested they take a short walk outside. "The forest is peaceful in the morning," he said. "It can help clear your mind." Ayanna hesitated, but then nodded. She didn't speak much, but she was slowly beginning to trust him. The morning air was crisp and cool, and the forest felt alive with movement. Birds chirped from high branches, and the wind rustled through the leaves. They walked along the narrow trail, stepping carefully over roots and rocks. Ayana moved with a quiet caution, glancing around as if afraid the forest might surprise her. James stayed close, always ready to help her if she stumbled or needed support. As they walked, James tried to make conversation. "Do you like walking in the forest?" he asked.
Ayana nodded slowly. It is
"Peaceful," she replied. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. James smiled.
Yes, it is. There's something about the quiet that makes you think, makes you feel connected to everything around you. She looked at him curiously, as if trying to understand why he felt so strongly about something as simple as walking.
James realized that Ayana had probably been alone for so long that any small act of kindness or normalcy felt strange to her. He wanted to give her time, to let her adjust at her own pace. After walking for a while, they reached a small stream that glistened under the morning sun. Ayana knelt by the water, letting her hands touch the cold surface. James watched her quietly. "Water is life," he said gently. "It keeps everything alive. The trees, the animals, even us." She looked up at him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "I understand," she said softly. There was a depth to her voice, a quiet intelligence that surprised James. He realized that despite her young age, she had already experienced more than most people ever would. They followed the stream for a while, listening to the soft babble of water over the rocks. Occasionally, small animals darted across their path. A squirrel, a rabbit, a bird taking flight. Ayana smiled faintly at the sight, her first real smile since James had found her. It was a small moment, but it carried a lot of weight. She was beginning to feel safe, and that was progress. Eventually, they returned to the cabin. James suggested they spend the afternoon doing something simple, something that could distract her from fear and uncertainty. "We could collect firewood, or I could show you some of the plants around here," he said. "There's a lot to learn about the forest." Ayana hesitated, then nodded. She seemed curious, and James was happy to see a spark of interest in her eyes. They spent the afternoon walking through the nearby woods, identifying plants and small flowers. James explained which ones were safe to touch and which ones could be harmful. He told her stories about the animals that lived in the forest and how they survived. Ayana listened attentively, asking quiet questions now and then. By late afternoon, they had collected enough wood to keep the fire going for the evening. James showed her how to stack the logs and light the small kindlings safely. She watched him carefully, her hands hovering over the sticks, as if she wanted to try, but was afraid of making a mistake. "You can try," James encouraged. "I'll be right here." With his guidance, she managed to light a small flame. Her face lit up with pride and a hint of surprise. "I did it," she said quietly, almost to herself.
James smiled warmly. Yes, you did.
"You're stronger than you think." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, James and Ayana sat by the fire. The warmth of the flames contrasted with the cool evening air. They ate a simple dinner of bread and soup, and for the first time Ayana seemed relaxed. She even laughed softly at the small joke James made about a squirrel stealing berries earlier that day. Night approached, and the forest outside grew darker. James knew that she had endured a lot in the past days, and he wanted her to feel secure before sleep. "Tomorrow, we can try to figure out where you belong," he said gently. "But tonight you should rest." She nodded, her eyes heavy but calm. "Thank you," she whispered. As she settled onto the small bed, James sat nearby, keeping a quiet watch over her. He thought about how fragile trust could be, yet how powerful it was once given. Ayana had started to rely on him even just a little, and that meant she believed she was safe. That was a responsibility he took seriously. Hours passed, and the fire crackled softly. Outside, the forest was alive with sounds of nocturnal animals moving quietly through the trees. Inside, the cabin was calm and safe. James reflected on the day, how far she had come, how she had learned small lessons about courage, and how she had begun to smile again. For Ayana, it had been a day of small victories. She had walked farther than she had in days, touched new plants, learned about fire, and felt the comfort of companionship. The world was still uncertain, But for the first time in a long time, she felt she was not completely alone. James knew the journey ahead would be long. He didn't know where her home was, who she belonged to, or what challenges they would face in the days to come. But he did know one thing. They would face it together. And sometimes, that was enough. As sleep finally claimed them, the quiet bond between the two grew stronger. A bond built not on words, but on shared experience, trust, and the small unspoken acts of kindness that made the world feel a little less lonely. The next morning, the forest was covered in a soft mist. James and Ayanna woke to the sound of birds calling in the trees and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. The day promised to be cool, with sunlight filtering through the fog in soft golden rays. James felt a quiet excitement. The forest always seemed to hold surprises, and today was no different. After a light breakfast of bread and fruit, James suggested they explore a little further than they had the day before.
"I think we should see what's beyond the hill," he said. "There's a small clearing there, and it's beautiful this time of year." Ayanna hesitated, her expression uncertain, but finally nodded.
She trusted him now enough to follow, and that trust made James feel responsible in the best way possible.
They packed some essentials in a small backpack: water, a few snacks, and a first aid kit. The path leading out of the cabin was slightly steeper than the trails they had walked before. Roots jutted out of the ground and wet leaves made the footing slippery. James took Ayanna's hand, not in a pushy way, but to steady her as they climbed. The higher they went, the more breathtaking the view became. Mist curled around the treetops like wisps of smoke, and patches of sunlight illuminated small flowers growing along the path. Ayanna's eyes widened, and a small smile formed on her face. "It's, beautiful," she said softly. James nodded. "Yes, it is. This forest has a way of surprising you if you pay attention." As they reached the clearing, they were greeted by the sight of a small pond reflecting the sky above. Dragonflies skimmed across the water's surface, and a few ducks swam quietly near the edge. James found a flat rock and motioned for Ayanna to sit. "Let's rest here for a while," he said. "You've been walking a lot, and it's good to take a break." They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the water lapping gently against the shore and the soft hum of insects. Then James began to tell stories, real stories from his own life, times when he had gotten lost as a child or faced challenges he had to overcome. Ayanna listened intently, occasionally asking questions. "You've had many adventures," she said finally. "Were you ever scared?" James thought for a moment. "Yes, I was scared many times. But fear teaches you something important. It shows you where you are brave, where you can trust yourself, and where you need help."
Ayanna nodded slowly, as if considering his words. "I
understand," she said. Her voice was quiet but thoughtful. James could see her mind working, piecing together her own experiences and trying to make sense of the world around her. After resting, they decided to follow a narrow trail along the edge of the clearing. The path led into denser forest, and the sunlight grew dim as tall trees formed a natural roof overhead. The forest was alive with sounds: the crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant call of a hawk, the occasional rustle of a small animal in the underbrush. Suddenly, Ayanna stopped and pointed to something on the ground. James leaned closer and saw tracks, small footprints that looked like they belonged to a deer. He smiled. "Look. Nature leaves its mark everywhere. These tracks tell a story. A deer passed through here not long ago." Ayanna crouched down, examining the tracks carefully. I didn't know the forest had so many stories," she whispered. James nodded. "It does. And if you pay attention, it teaches you how to survive, how to notice things, and even how to respect life around you." They continued walking, enjoying the quiet beauty of the forest, when suddenly they heard a rustling in the bushes ahead. A small fox emerged, pausing to look at them before darting across the path and disappearing into the trees. Ayanna gasped softly, and James chuckled. "They're shy creatures," he explained, "but seeing one is always special. It's a reminder that the forest is full of life, even when it's hidden."
As they neared a small hill, clouds began to gather, and the wind picked up slightly.
James noticed Ayanna looking uneasy.
It's okay, he said.
We'll find shelter before the rain comes. They reached a large tree with a wide canopy and settled under its branches as the first drops of rain began to fall. The sound of rain on leaves was soothing, and Ayanna's nervousness slowly eased. James handed her his jacket to keep warm, and they sat together watching the rain fall in a gentle rhythmic pattern. While waiting for the rain to stop, James asked gently, "Do you ever wonder what life would be like if you weren't alone in the forest?" Ayanna thought for a moment. I used to dream of being safe, of having someone care, but I didn't know if it would happen, she admitted. Her voice was quiet, almost shy. James smiled. Sometimes life surprises you. People can care when you least expect it. That's what happened today, remember? Ayanna nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. She seemed to relax more, as if she was realizing that she could trust him. It was a small step, but in her situation it meant everything. When the rain eased, they continued their walk, heading down the hill toward a patch of open meadow. The ground was wet and muddy, but the sight of wildflowers and butterflies made the effort worthwhile. Ayanna bent down to touch a bright yellow flower, her fingers brushing the petals carefully. James watched her with a quiet pride. She was learning to enjoy the world again, to notice beauty, and to connect with life in a way she hadn't been able to for a long time. As the sun began to lower in the sky, they realized it was time to head back to the cabin. The forest was growing darker, and shadows stretched long across the path. James took Ayanna's hand again, steadying her as they walked. Suddenly, a loud crack of thunder echoed through the trees. Ayanna froze, her eyes wide with fear. James immediately knelt beside her. "It's okay," he said firmly but gently. "Thunder can be scary, but we're safe. Look at me, we're together. Nothing will hurt you." She nodded, clutching his hand tightly. The storm rumbled above and rain began to fall once more, heavier this time. James guided her along the trail, pointing out natural shelters under large tree roots and bushes, until they found a safe spot to wait it out. As they sat together huddled under the protective branches, James realized how much Ayanna had grown in just a few days. She had gone from a frightened lost girl to someone who could walk long distances, notice details in the forest, and even face her fears with quiet courage. Hours passed and eventually the storm subsided. They carefully made their way back to the cabin, the forest glistening under the light of a setting sun. By the time they arrived, both were soaked but unharmed. James quickly started a small fire in the fireplace to warm them. Ayanna changed into dry clothes he had brought from his backpack, and they sat by the fire, drinking warm tea. "You did very well today," James said softly. "You faced the storm, walked far, and stayed brave." Ayanna smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. I think I can do more now," she said quietly. "With your help." James nodded. "Yes. Together we can do anything. But always remember, courage doesn't mean never being afraid. It means facing fear, step by step." As night fell, they prepared for bed. The day had been long and challenging, yet full of small victories. Ayanna's confidence had grown, and her trust in James had strengthened. They both knew the journey ahead would still have difficulties, but they had taken another important step together, learning that challenges could be faced safely with patience, trust, and careful guidance. As James watched Ayanna sleep that night, he felt a deep sense of hope. The forest had taught them lessons in courage, patience, and trust. And though the path ahead was uncertain, he knew they would face it together, learning and growing every step of the way. The bond they were forming, quiet, steady, and real, was more powerful than either of them could have imagined. The morning sun rose slowly over the forest, casting warm light on the cabin where James and Ayanna had spent the last few days. Birds chirped cheerfully in the trees, and the air smelled fresh and clean. Today, James had decided it was time to try and figure out where Ayanna truly belonged. While the forest had been a safe place for her, He knew that eventually she would need to reconnect with family or a safe community. After a simple breakfast of bread, fruit, and tea, James suggested, "I think today we should try to find some clues about your home. Maybe there's someone looking for you, or a place where you can be safe." Ayana nodded quietly. She had grown more confident over the last few days, but there was still a hint of nervousness in her eyes. She trusted James completely, but the idea of stepping beyond the small circle of safety around the cabin made her uneasy.
"Don't worry," James said gently, noticing her hesitation. "I'll stay with you."
"We'll figure it out together." They packed a small bag with essentials: water, some food, a blanket, and a notebook James carried for notes and maps. As they left the cabin, the forest seemed alive with promise. Each step they took felt purposeful, a small adventure, but one with an important goal. They followed the narrow trail that led to the edge of the forest, where the trees thinned and opened into rolling fields. In the distance, a few smoke plumes rose from chimneys in the small town nearby. James suggested they head there. "There might be someone who knows your family or can help us find a safe place for you," he explained. The walk was long, but the scenery was beautiful. Ayana noticed the way the sunlight danced on the tall grasses, the way small birds flitted between the trees, and the soft hum of insects in the air. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of the world. She was observing it, learning from it, and slowly letting herself feel hope. As they reached the outskirts of the town, James stopped by a small park and sat down on a bench. "We should think about the next step," he said. "Do you remember anything about your home? A village, a town, anyone who might be looking for you?" Ayana thought carefully. I remember my grandmother's house near the river. There was a big oak tree in the yard. And in the market with many people," she said softly. Her voice wavered as memory surfaced, but her eyes lit up with recognition. James smiled gently. "That's a good start. Do you think you can remember the name of the town?" She shook her head. "No, but the river and the oak tree are important. Maybe someone will know. Then we follow that clue. We'll find the river first. Once we're near it, we can ask around." They walked carefully into the town, Ayana staying close to James. The streets were quiet in the morning, with small shops opening and townspeople going about their daily routines. They approached a small cafe near the riverbank, where James thought someone might have local knowledge. "Excuse me," James said to the woman arranging flowers outside the cafe. "We're looking for a river near this town and a house with a big oak tree. Do you know anyone like that?" The woman paused, her eyes thoughtful. "There's only one river in this area, and I know a family who lives near a big oak tree by the bank. The girl's grandmother has lived there for years. Are you looking for her granddaughter?" Ayana's heart leapt. She nodded slowly. "Yes, that's me," she whispered. The woman smiled warmly. "Then you must be safe now. Follow me. I'll take you there." James followed quietly, watching as Ayana's steps grew lighter. The air around them seemed to shimmer with hope and relief. They walked along a narrow path that led to the riverbank. In the distance, a large oak tree stood proudly, its branches stretching toward the sky. Next to it, a small wooden house looked as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. Ayana's pace quickened. She could see her grandmother's figure near the porch, waving gently. Her eyes filled with tears as she ran forward, calling softly, "Grandmother." Her grandmother dropped her basket and ran to meet her, wrapping her arms around Ayana tightly. "My dear child, you're safe. You're finally safe," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with relief and joy. Ayana buried her face in her grandmother's shoulder, feeling warmth, love, and safety she hadn't known in a long time. James stood back for a moment, smiling quietly. He had done what he had set out to do. He had brought her home, and in the process, had helped her find hope again. Her grandmother looked at James with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "You've brought her back to me. How can I ever repay you?" James shook his head. "No repayment is needed. Seeing her safe and happy is enough," he said. For a moment, Ayana simply held her grandmother's hand, then looked back at James. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes shining. I wouldn't have made it without you. James smiled. You were brave. You made it through. I just helped guide you a little. The rest of the day passed quietly and peacefully. Ayanna reacquainted herself with her home, walking through the garden, touching familiar objects, and listening to her grandmother's stories. She laughed, shared memories, and slowly allowed herself to feel that sense of belonging she had missed for so long. James stayed for a while, helping her grandmother with small chores and making sure Ayanna was comfortable and happy. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, James realized it was time to leave. He had been a guide, a helper, and a friend, but now Ayanna was back where she belonged. Her journey of survival had ended, and a new chapter of trust, love, and family life was beginning. Ayanna hugged James tightly. I will never forget you, she whispered. You saved me not just from being lost, but from fear and loneliness. James smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. Remember, courage comes from inside you. You found it all along. You just needed a little help to see it, he said softly. He waved goodbye and walked back toward the forest, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The forest had taught him lessons as well, about patience, trust, and the quiet strength that can form between two people, even in the briefest time. That night, Ayanna sat by the window of her home, looking at the stars above. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had survived, she had learned courage, and she had found a safe place where she belonged, and she knew that no matter what happened, the kindness of one person could change a life forever. James, walking along the familiar forest trail, thought of Ayanna and smiled. He didn't need recognition or reward. The knowledge that she was safe, happy, and strong was enough. Life was unpredictable, full of challenges, but also full of moments of connection, hope, and quiet triumphs. And so both of them looked forward to the future. Ayanna, with a safe home, and the love of her grandmother, and James, with the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had helped someone find their way back to hope. Their paths had crossed at just the right time, and the bond they had formed would remain in their hearts forever, a reminder that courage, trust, and kindness could overcome even the most difficult days.